inherited a cabin in the woods from my grandfather, found photos of myself that I never captured. My grandfather left me the cabin and a key that warmed in my palm like a living thing. The lawyer called it straightforward. My mother said I didn't owe the place anything. I drove up anyway, tin sky, teeth of pines, telling myself I was only there to decide. The first photograph had a thumbprint in the corner and my face in the middle, gap-toothed, sunburned, a boy I wasn't. The date said a summer I should have spent in a high-rise 2 states away. In the glass, my present face looked back over a boy grinning beside a cedar I hadn't met. I should have put it down. Instead, I listened to the cabin breathe, the floorboards ticking with evening chill, the window panes clicking in their old paint, the tree line fusing into one blue mass that watched back. Everyone in town said, "Welcome back." I said thank you and carried the brown envelope with the deed inside, warm as an animal against my ribs. The clerk at the county office asked about my mother's pie. I smiled until the silence broke like thin ice. He cleared his throat, stamped the papers, and slid them to me with the careful grace one uses for a dangerous heirloom. The cabin smelled of dry cedar, mouse droppings, a little cold engine oil. Dust had a flavor here, papery, sweet, almost like the taste of a book spine when you grip it in your teeth to pull it down. I locked the door out of a habit that didn't belong to me and rubbed the key between my fingers. The grain in the wooden door looked like running water frozen midstream. On the mantel, the photos marched in mismatched frames, Polaroids with lifted corners, a school portrait with the blue swirled backdrop, a snapshot of a boy in a property line cap holding a fish, the same face. My face, with marks of years I had not lived. At the far end was a Christmas morning. The boy wore a sweater with wood smoke on it. The handwriting beneath was my grandfather, S., my best fella, 1998. I had not been born then, but the boy looked up at me as if I had been. He had my cowlick, the stubborn tilt of teeth, the way the left eyebrow broke into a brief line at the arch, even the slight hollowness at the temples. He had, beneath the sweater, a little pear-shaped belly that I remembered only from a photograph of myself at 3. He stood in front of a cardboard fort made of appliance boxes. The fort had a flag taped to a broom handle. The flag said, in red marker, "Keep out." The air thickened. I read the dates twice. I said nothing to the empty room, which had the courtesy not to say anything back. Before the drive up, my mother had pressed the key into my palm and covered my hand with both of hers. The skin on the back of her hand had thinned since I'd last watched it move, the veins soft as vines. She said, "You don't have to go if you don't want." It was the last thing her father left you, she added, but in a voice that meant he had left more than that. I told her I wanted to see the place. I wanted to take stock. I wanted to decide. She looked away when I said decide, like the word itself carried splinters. "He died in winter," she said, "the kind of winter that sticks." She did not come to the funeral. That told me something I had not learned in all the years between us. I folded grief in my coat pocket, and when I reached the mountain town at dusk and saw the long tin roofs and the pizza place and the single green light at the pharmacy, I learned how that grief could feel at home in a place I had never set foot. Now, inside, I tucked the photos under my arm and walked the cabin with slow, cold hands. The kitchen sink sat beneath a single window clouded with film. A page had been taped to the cupboard above the sink. The tape had yellowed. The page had wrinkle lines like an old palm. The ink had bled slightly in places, serifs softened to little curls. It started with a title written in a careful capital hand, House Rules. No dishes in the sink overnight. No porch light after 11. Don't look at the tree line too long. If a voice uses your name and you don't see a person, answer with, "Wrong house." If the forest calls your name, send another. I read that last line 3 times. A bubble of cold air swelled against my throat and popped. The refrigerator moaned and knocked into a rusted rhythm. I opened it. It held stubborn jars, relish, mustard like dried paint, a mason jar of pine cones for some reason. The freezer contained 10 frost-burned steaks and a folded paper wrapped around a brick of something gray. I shut it. The paper on the cupboard hung there with patient gravity, not explaining itself. I took the deeds out of the envelope and laid them on the little kitchen table. The top one had a gold seal. The bottom one had an addendum in my grandfather's hand, thin, angular, like a winter branch scratching the pane. The property, chattels, and responsibilities of the home and perimeter to pass to my heir body. He had crossed out heir. He had written heir body. The pen dug deep enough in the paper to emboss the wood beneath. My fingers traced the groove without meaning to. The wood under my finger felt faintly greasy, as if the word had been pressed often. At dusk, a truck pulled into the gravel. I was at the table with a warmed can of stew, watching the seam on the wall pulse with late heat. The truck door slammed. Boots came up the steps. A knock, 3 even taps, polite. I opened the door and a man in a quilted jacket grinned at me from the cold. His cheeks were rabbit red. His hands were cracked around the knuckles. He smelled like cedar chips and diesel. "Well, heck," he said. "Look who bothered to come back." "I'm sorry," I said. "Have we?" "You going by Eli again, or was it Liam last I saw you? Your granddad never could decide." He leaned a little, peering past me into the house, eyes flicking up to the mantel and the photos there. "You're taller than the last one. I told Reg you would be." I said, and gave my real name. The full one, the one that sounded official on forms and wrong when anyone but my mother used it. He nodded like I'd confirmed a trivia fact. "You were the one with the cowlick. Good to see you found your way." His voice softened. "Alma made a loaf for you. I would have come sooner, but the culvert flooded." He pressed a wrapped loaf into my hands. It was still warm through the towel. "Eat," he said. "You always forgot to eat." His eyes held a private thought. He had the careful air of someone speaking to the recently unwell. He looked at the framed photo at my shoulder. He looked back at me. "You going to keep it?" "The cabin." "The arrangement." He said it as if I'd know what he meant. When I didn't answer, his mouth tightened. "Okay," he said, but his eyes had cooled. He left me a business card that turned out not to be a business card. On the back, in a firm, much more recent hand, a phone number and one note. "Call if you want help finding a boy." That's what it said. A boy. As if boys were a chore to be ticked off a list, like winterizing or cleaning gutters. After he left, the house felt even quieter. The loaf steamed in the cold air like a sleeping animal. I set it on the counter and stared at the phone number until the numbers felt like shapes rather than tools. I cleared the plates that had been left in the dish rack, washed them out of a reflex that didn't belong to me, and put them away squeaking. I went to the bunk room at the back of the cabin. 2 bunks had been built into one wall, a carpenter's flex that made the room feel like a ship. The air hummed with old sleep and damp wool. On the wall by the bunks was a growth chart, knife marks carved one above the other all the way to the ceiling. Names written in pencil faded to dust. Some entries were my name, written carefully in different hands. Over and over, my name at 7, my name at 9.5, my name at 13, next to a line too short for me at 13. The pencil had smudged where someone pressed their thumb, like a blur bar in an old photograph. Then a date that was older than I was. This, too, made its own kind of sense in my body before it made sense in my mind. My knees remembered a height they had not been. My shoulders hurt with a weight they had not lifted. My throat felt the burn of shouting in a field I had never crossed. I touched one of the marks, a whisper of carbon on old paint. The bed creaked as if to agree. There was a little desk in that room, a cheap metal thing with a drawer. The drawer was locked. The key sat on top of it, laid out like a suggestion caught in midair. The key had a paper tag looped around it with twine. The tag said, in that same firm hand, the one that wrote the phone number, for when you're ready. I took the key and stood there a long breath, tasting dust and old varnish, and then I opened the drawer. Inside, an organized life that wasn't mine waited like a skeleton in a museum case. Plastic sleeves with cards from places I'd never been. School IDs for a school I never attended. A worn social card with my number and a different middle name. 3 driver's licenses with my photograph rendered into different ages. They had the kind of edges that come from nights in a back pocket. They smelled like pockets, inexplicable spice, a little fry grease, the ghosts of places where men stand and wait. One in particular made my head ring. The photo was me at 16, only I had never had a license at 16. My eyes looked off to the side in the picture, like someone had called me from the edge of the frame. The lamination had bubbled at the corner where a thumbnail had worried it over and over. Under the sleeve sat a Polaroid envelope with a rubber band. The band snapped when I slid it off. I lifted the stack. The top photo had my grandfather's hand in it, his thick fingers pressing my shoulder possessively. My face was tilted, obedient to the pressure, a little smile pinned like a moth. On the back pencil, a name that wasn't quite mine, not wrong exactly, just bent. Under that, a folded paper folded again and again until it had the smoothness of a worn coin. I opened it carefully along its oil-soft creases. When the forest calls, send another. The same words from the list above the sink. Only this time, beneath it, a component I had not seen. This is how we keep the original. I put the paper down. I sat on the lower bunk, which sighed like it recognized my weight. The mattress had springs that remembered 1,000 small motions. I pressed my palms to my eyes until I saw color fields. I tried to breathe. I tried not to cry. I thought of my mother's hands, the thin skin on the back of them, the way she had looked away when she said decide. The phone on the counter buzzed. The screen lit the kitchen in a small, cold blue through the doorway. The light scraped along the hall floor like the edge of a pond in January. I went to it. The number was unknown. The message preview said only, "Are you back?" I opened the thread. There were no prior messages, no history, just the town waiting. "Are you back?" I typed, "Who is this?" 3 dots pulsed, tiny hearts throbbing. Then, "You know me." I did not. The next message, "Check the logs, he didn't delete them." There was a voicemail icon I hadn't noticed. I pressed it. A war of old voices filled the kitchen. The phone barked in my grandfather's voice from some other year, his vowels ironed flat by the mountains. "I told you only at the back door," his voice said. Then, "Don't answer to it after midnight. You hear me." Next, a voice like mine at 12. "Is it going to be fun?" Another voice, my grandfather, weary and false cheerful. "As a flea circus." A third, my grandfather again, older, hoarse. You're him as much as it matters." I fumbled the phone silent with too much force. The sound cut off like a rope. The farther I got from the center of the cabin, the colder it felt, as if the warmth too had been arranged in layers. I did not sleep much that night. The bed had the fossil of another boy's shoulder in it. I woke from shallow dreams with the feeling of someone sitting on the edge of the mattress. I turned, and no one was there. The window showed trees as a black lace, more pattern than object. Somewhere, an owl called and a smaller bird answered, at the wrong pitch for a bird. In the morning, the town fit me with the wrong stories in every doorway. At the little store with hand-drawn signs, the woman behind the counter called me Mads and asked if my ankle had healed. I looked down at my ankle involuntarily, as if a bruise could appear under the gaze. At the post office, the man in the blue jacket asked how my uncle was, then corrected himself and flushed. At the hardware place, Red, whom I had never met, hugged me so hard he picked my feet off the floor. "Lost your boot in the creek that fall," he said into my hair. "You cried like a kettle, had to drive you home barefoot, and you kept your foot on the dash like a cat the whole way." He put me down, thumbed under his nose. "Man gets old," he said, almost to himself, "and the years get bunched in the corners. You don't pull them out, they get moldy." He looked at me with a brightness I wanted to step out of. "You staying up there again?" "For now," I said. "Then you come by if you need something," he said. "If you need a boy run up for you, you call me." He handed me a sack with nails and a coil of bright nylon line I had not asked for. "Chore money, you remember," he added, and then his voice sank. "Rules are rules." On the way back up, I slowed at the pull-off that showed the cabin like a toy across the valley. The trees rose in gathered sprays, dark and clean. The clearing around the cabin was a shaved scalp of frost. I looked for my own figure at the door, for a movement that matched me, and felt the absurd ache of memory for something I had not lived. Back inside, I pulled the photos off the mantel and laid them out in rows on the table. My face aged invisible steps across the wood, a flipbook of someone I should have been. Some had rounded edges from pockets. Some had cracked surfaces like dry riverbeds. On the back of one, my grandfather's hand, Summer Boy, 2004. I would have been not yet 5. In the picture, he stood hip high to my grandfather. The cedar behind us had a rope looped over a low branch, a tire poised like an eye. A dog I did not know blinked mid-sneeze. I looked for seams in the faces, for a difference in ear shape, teeth, some cheat of the myth. But if those boys were not me, they were close enough you could make a life out of them. In the afternoon, the wind made the eaves rattle. The house had a clock inside it that ticked even when the battery was not in, something about the way the walls remembered heartbeat. I stood in front of the growth chart with the pencil in my hand. My body wanted to mark it. That old itch. Look how tall. Look how much. I pressed the pencil into the paint and stopped. The urge felt borrowed, like a cough you catch from the man next to you. I slid the pencil behind my ear. My finger went to one of the names beside a mark and rested there, like that might tell me something about the boy who had stood there while my grandfather squinted and flattened his hair and pressed the pencil right there at the crown. There was a vent about shin-high, a little metal grill. It rattled on an offbeat with the wind. I unscrewed it without knowing why. The screws came out with the stubborn squeal of metal that hasn't moved in a decade. Inside, the duct was furred with dust like gray moss. Taped to the side, a wrapped bundle yellowed with time, duct tape over brown paper. I slid my hand in until my shoulder hit metal and the cold bit bone. My fingertips found the tape. I pulled. It let go with a sound like skin. Back at the table, I cut the tape with the butter knife. Inside was a small recorder and a slip of paper in my grandfather's hand. Not a confession, the paper began. An accounting, if I ever forget why. I pressed play. Static seeped out like old light, then his voice, dull and tired. "If you are hearing this," he said, "it means the years bunched up. It means you came to the end of one string and picked up the next." A long breath, the clack of his thumbnail on the recorder case. "I lost the first boy," he said. "I lost the real one." The chair under me felt as if it pushed me up from below, like a wave. I leaned forward without noticing. My throat closed, dry as insulation. "Your mother was out getting blood drawn," he said, as if I would know which time. "He was in the yard with me. Your hair stood up in the wind. You liked to stand and feel that. You laughed like a little kettle." The recorder picked up a scrape, something like a boot heel on linoleum. I looked away. It called, and I sent no one. Silence, the kind that hurts the inside of the ears. "I didn't know until later that's what it was," he said, voice gone old. "I told myself a dog, a car. I told myself a man took him. But the woods were full that day. They were full of me." His voice broke briefly and flattened itself. "When I knew, I went into the trees with a rope and a jug. The rope I left there, I brought the jug back." He cleared his throat. "It was patient with me," he said. "It wanted an original, but it could be taught paperwork." The word sounded like a joke. He had made 20 times to hear it not be true. "Oh, I made a line," he said. "You were a boy in a city. I kept you away in paper. I kept you away in the way we told it. I brought it boys that were almost you. I made it a ledger. I sent another when it called. It took what we sent and left us our shape. It left me you." The recorder clicked as if moved. "It took your birthdays like rent. It took your broken arm like a tax. It took your summer at 9. It took your first kiss in winter because I forgot the porch light. It kept its side. I kept mine." Something like laughter, but he stopped it, swallowed it. "If you are hearing this because I failed, I am sorry," he said after a time. "If you are hearing this because you came here out of guilt or duty, I am sorrier. The rule is the only one that matters. If the forest calls your name, send another." He knocked the recorder 3 times with his knuckle. "Because it wants the original," he said, softer. "And it can be convinced. It can be confused with enough paper in the drawer." I turned it off with a shaking finger. I felt a heat I did not expect rise in me like a tide. It was not anger, not at him directly. It was something like the feeling of holding a crying child at arm's length and realizing they have a bruise shaped like your watchband. It was shame. It was discovery. It was the weight of a name pressed too hard into paper. Dusk fell faster that second night. The cabin took on its old engines, the ticking and clicking and the small landslides inside the walls that came when the temperature dropped. The forest eased toward the cabin, not in movement but in mood. The blue of it go deeper, the edges of things blurred. I made a fire with the wood that lay stacked in a way that looked like a polite apology. Flames moved behind the grate like shy animals, looking at me and away. I sat on the floor with the recorder and the papers and the IDs laid out like a set of bones. The phone buzzed again, same number. "Do you need him?" it asked. "Who?" I wrote. "A boy," it wrote back. "We can find you one good." My thumb hovered. The fire licked the wood with tiny sighs. The windows passed the occasional pine shape like a slow swimmer going by. The reflection of the flames made those passes look nearer than they were. I set the phone face down like one might set a live thing. The screen lit the table from underneath. The blue made the papers look not like bones, but like fish in shallow water. The tap came around 11, not loud at all. The kind of tap a polite person gives when they don't want to wake a house full of sleepers. 3 taps, then a pause, then 2 more. I stood without meaning to. The fire settled. I went to the window nearest the door. I stood just to the side and looked not at the trees but at their reflection in the glass. In the reflection, I saw myself with my hands on the sill. Behind me, the room. Behind the room, the trees. In that overlapping, my face did something wrong. It split. For a heartbeat, there were 2 of my faces, one clean, one slightly out of register, like a newsprint misprint, blue and red ghosting at the edges. The tap came again, 3, a pause, 2. My name, then, spoken in a voice that could have been my mother's if you played it in another room. It said the first syllable like we were late. It said the last as if it held a blanket in its arms. I did not answer. The rule felt like a thermometer laid under my tongue. "Wrong house," I said, quietly into my shoulder. The tap paused, then it came again, cheerful as before. "You're behind," the voice said in a tone that ached to hear. "You didn't pay July." The deed sat on the table. The addendum to it, with its ugly word, dared me not to admit I understood. The drawer in the bunk room full of paperwork breathed like a throat. The phone buzzed. Red, the name had put itself there, I couldn't say how, as if the phone knew what the town knew. "Don't look at it," the text said. "Answer the back door if you have to." A second later, "You need a boy? We can ask Alma's nephew. He's got the look." The look, my face, given to another like a hand-me-down coat. I put the phone down and went to the sink. The page above it said, among other things, no porch light after 11. The light was off, the porch held only gloom thick as felt. I could see my shape in the glass, layered over the black beyond like a sticker. When the next tap came, it came in that human rhythm, the exact one we use without realizing. Tap, 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 expectant. I thought of boys, unparented or just bored or just in need, climbing steps, because an adult asked them to and told them it was a game. I saw my grandfather's big hand on a shoulder, guiding. I saw a boy's smile pinned in a Polaroid flash like a moth in a shadow box. "Wrong house," I said again. My voice was loud in there, too loud, too bravely framed. The voice outside sighed, amused. The sigh pressed against the window and fogged a patch of glass at the edge where the caulk had forgotten its job. I did not sleep. At 3, the tapping stopped. At 4, the ice inside the fridge cracked and melted into a bored drip. At 5, birds started tasting the air with sound, notes soft and separate. At 6, the trees became trees again and the house shook itself and remembered how to be harmless. I made coffee with grounds that had turned to damp sand and drank it anyway. The taste had a brownness that I could not name. I held the mug like another hand would not hurt. With the light came the old anger, clean and sharp, and pointed the way new light is on frost. I emptied the drawer. I took the paper sleeves and the IDs and the Polaroids and the folded lists and the old library cards and the rubber bands, and I built a small bonfire in the firebox. The paper whispered like leaves when I stacked it. The plastic did not whisper. It lay there, dull and patient, little skins of persons. I folded the deed addendum into a neat square and tucked it into the heart. The matchbox had 3 matches. My hand shook. I cupped the first, struck. It flared, the sulfur a bright rotten egg that somehow made my mouth water. The paper took slow, always slower at first, and then like a breath finds its rhythm. Names curled into black lace and then into nothing. Faces turned away into air. I didn't watch all of it. I walked to the door. The cold met me like I'd been expected. The porch boards were rhymed, little sugar stars on the grain. I didn't turn the porch light on. I stood there and breathed until my breath was a steady shape. I stepped out onto the second step, the one that creaked, the one Red would know by sound alone, and raised my head the way my grandfather must have, but with a different purpose. "I'm done," I said to the trees. "I'm done with the ledger." My voice felt too small in that open air, but it carried. Sound loves a valley, it climbs the ribs of it and purls over. "I'll not send boys to keep a shape," I said. "If you want me, you will have to learn me." The trees held their breath. My name rippled out of the dark, not from one place. From the trunks, from the soft ground, from the place where your eyes are not sure whether it is a shadow or a hollow. There was warmth in it. There was a memory of a hand that had brushed my hair flat when my cowlick wouldn't be polite. "This is my name," I said, and I said it in full, all syllables. The name that looks like it belongs on a diploma. The name my mother whispered into my hair in the hospital when we were new to each other. "This is me. I am not a sum of near me's." The sound that came back was not anger. It was not approval. It was an adjustment, like a person putting on a shirt that does not quite fit. It tried the weight of the syllables. It tried the rhythm. It learned and did not like the cut. I took one more step. The porch boards gave a creak a little too soft to be wood. The cold moved through my shoes and up my bones like a hand checking a fever. I raised my voice without shouting. "No more stand-ins," I said. "No more receipts. You don't get to be lazy." The anger had a shape now, and it was not a knife. It was a door I was closing. I said the names of the boys I could glean from the back of the photos. Liam, Mads, Eli, a Ben that showed up only once, a Reed whose mouth looked almost like mine when he said a word with a round vowel. I said them and I said, "I release you." It felt foolish, and it felt right the way singing feels when no one hears you but you know your voice is shaped for it. The trees moved, but there was no wind. It was the movement of decision. It was the kind of shift old animals make when they decide whether you are food or something else. I did not move away. I did not hold out my hands. I stood and let the cold push into my places, down to the root of me that had been held away in paper and faces. I thought of my mother in the kitchen at 3 in the morning, putting a pot of water to boil just to have a purposeless heat. I thought of my grandfather with his big, clumsy hands. I thought of the boy who laughed at the wind when it lifted his hair, and I let the laughing and the wind be mine without a price. When it came as a thinning, not a shape, not a sound, a lightness in the air like an elevator arriving at a floor you didn't ask for. My name breathed across the yard. It stopped at the second syllable. It went back and tried again. It tried the name I had worn when I was 10. It tried the name that fit in my mouth in the photo where I was 16 and the lamination had a worried corner. It tried grandfather. It tried boy. "No," I said, "it's me." There was a tremor in the cedar branches. Little beads of frost let go and sounded like distant applause in the duff. Something withdrew behind that. It will always be a choice in my mind whether I stood my ground and it left, or whether it was bored and decided to check another ledger. But this is what I have to believe. Bargains harden like arteries. If you break them and stay present, they crack, and what is hungry looks for an easier mouth. Light found the high edges of the trees. In that pale wash, the space under the branches was not entirely empty. It was only a little emptier than it had been when I first looked at it, which is to say, the original emptiness of a thing remembered correctly. I went back inside. The fire had gone to meat-red chunks. The house smelled like plastic and sweet paper. The drawer gaped. The sink had one plate in it. I washed it because it felt good to decide, and because the rules above the sink asked nicely. I took the growth chart and pressed my thumb to my name. I stood under the pencil marks and felt my current height adjust in my bones like a tripod finding level ground. I did not press a new mark into the wall. I let the old marks be fossils. Red knocked at noon. He lifted his cap when I opened the door and then let it fall back. He studied my face like you study a horizon for weather. "You look different," he said. "I'm trying that." "You need a boy?" he asked, slower now, a sadness in it. He had been a help all his life. He had worn a groove in that shape. "No," I swallowed. "I'm ending the thing." He scratched his jaw. The skin made a dry sound under his nails. He glanced past me to the mantel where the frames had left rectangles of clean wood. He looked at the firebox and saw something of what I had done. His throat moved. Men like Red do not cry, not in the doorway, but the air around him brightened like a thing relieved and not ready to be. "Okay," he said, "I'll tell Alma the bread was good." He stepped back, then forward again. "If you hear it, don't go outside," he said. "Not for another night. It likes a show." "I stood out there," I said. "I told it my name." His eyes did a private calculation. "Maybe that's a good thing," he said. "Maybe it's a good thing." He reached up and tapped the doorframe. "You're taller," he said, and tried a smile. "You finally grew." I laughed because it was a kindness. He left me with a bag of apples whose skins looked like little suns in the dull kitchen light. They tasted sharp and clean, and the taste woke up the past of 1,000 apples eaten by 100 boys who resembled me. That afternoon, I swept the floors and found a coin under the stove, slick with old oil. It had a year on it that meant nothing and meant everything. I wiped the counters. I took the house rules down and put it in a drawer not because I was keeping it, but because I wanted to choose the angle at which I would forget it. The sink held no dishes that night because I washed them because I like waking to a clean sink, not because the page told me so. The night came, and the taps did not. My phone lay face down and did not buzz. I read a paperback I found behind the couch that had been read until its spine was a flock of soft lines. The words left shadows on the page where somebody had once underlined with a ballpoint that ran out. I fell asleep with the book on my chest and woke with a line on my cheek that looked like an unambitious scar. In the morning, I locked the door and hid the key in the place my mother told me long ago the key should go. I walked down the steps and put my hand on the railing that my grandfather had oiled until it glowed like bread crust. The forest did not call my name. It did not care. That was better. At the bottom of the drive, I stopped at the mailbox and put the recorder and the addendum into an envelope addressed to myself. I mailed it to the city. I did not know if I would keep it when it arrived. I only knew that if I left it here, it would be too easy to become part of the house again. Red's truck passed me on the road, and he lifted 2 fingers from the wheel, a gesture that meant 2 things at once. I see you, and I am not saying more. I drove home with the window cracked, the air a little needle that kept me awake. The town fell behind like a story told to a new friend. On the highway, the world widened until the trees were only accents. My hands kept their grip at 10 and 2. When I reached the city, the glass in the buildings caught the low sun and cupped it for a second like hot water in a palm before letting it spill. I climbed the stairs to my apartment and found my door with that stutter of delight that familiar things bring when you half expect them to have shifted. The hall smelled like someone's soup and someone else's dog. I unlocked my door. The bolt slid smooth. The sound comforted me more than I wanted. Inside, the heat had run while I was gone. The air felt stale and new, like a book read again. I set my bag down. I looked at the mirror over the dresser because it was habit, the way I check if I carried myself through the door or if some other version came in wearing my coat. It hung a fraction lower than before. Not much, not enough that anyone else might see it. The nail had found a new notch. The frame leaned a degree warmer. My face slid into that lower frame like a person of a different height had adjusted it and then decided that was right. I smiled at myself on purpose. I let my eyes soften. A person could be kind to themselves after a year like that. I breathed, the glass fogged with me. 2 breath clouds formed before mine did. They were small and brief, and then gone, as if the mirror itself had been outside and brought a little cold in on its surface. The air in the room tasted like a pine cleaner dream. My breath left prints that were whole but shook a little at the edges. The mirror hung lower. I watched my face in it until my eyes watered and blinked. My breath kept its pace in the glass like a metronome. I did not turn around. I did not need to. I waited. I held. The apartment hummed like a safe, dull animal. When I moved slow. I took the mirror off the hook. I set it on the dresser. I whispered my full name to the empty room. The sound went nowhere, and then it went everywhere, filling each corner like warm air after a long winter. I went to the window and opened it an inch. The city sound came in, ordinary and forgiving. A bus sighed at a stop. A woman laughed in a hall. A pigeon did what pigeons always do. On the back of the mirror, there was nothing. No notes, no marks, only the dust pattern of the hook. I hung it a little higher than it had been before. I stepped back and met myself in it again, and the line of my shoulders felt like mine. Some nights still, when I brush my teeth and watch the foam go muddy with coffee, I see the breath clouds form wrong in the glass. 2 first, then mine. They are small, like an eager animal waiting its turn at a bowl, patient, watching. I breathe again and they go. They keep going faster now. Maybe they will stop. Maybe the ledger still keeps one small line. The next time I go up to that cabin, I will bring a hammer and a jar of new nails. I will bring paint for the growth chart to seal those names into the wall not as orders but as fossils. I will bring apples for Red and a loaf for Alma I bake myself. I will bring no boys. I will bring my name, whole, and I will say it to the tree line. I will say it again to the trees and again to the place where the black feels thickest, and I will wait until the sound becomes only sound. And when the mirror in my bedroom fogs wrong, I will not call a number from a card. I will not write a list to tape to a cupboard. I will stand there, a man who keeps his breath in his own chest, and I will breathe until the glass gives me back only one cloud.